So in this episode, Julian Baker and I bust a load of myths about massage, what are muscle knots, about core work, all about foam rollers, this is iconoclastic, this one, I think is the word. Am I saying that? Lots and lots of myths about touch, about movement, and particularly about anatomy. This guy's got a great view of anatomy. So I know him a little bit, so it's good banter as well. So I think you'll enjoy this one. Okay, on the show today, Julian Baker. So Julian has I have to say, interesting guy is what everyone says about him because they don't know what to say. Manual therapist, background in Bowen Technique. I'm sure he'll tell us what that is. Anatomist. I cut up a dead body with him once. Certainly has well thought through opinions on things. So Julian, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, sort of that's damned with faint praise. Certainly has well thought opinions on things.
No, you do.
It's
you're one of the more interesting people to speak to.
And yeah, you too. People one of those things you can see on a report card from school. Julian has.
Yeah. It's sort of like that. I think we both have this. That people say, "Oh, you shouldn't meet Mark," but there's a couple of things you should know. Or you should meet Julian, but he's great, but although, do you know what I mean? There's a way in which we're a bit argumentative, or we say things other people don't. And there's always you should meet him, and then ...
Yeah, I think you and I think people would pay good money to watch, to give us a subject and watch you and I go at it.
Aspiring match.
We are different. We're very similar in many respects, but we're also very different. And I really like that, so...
Yeah, and I know you genuinely say smart things that no one else says, so I'm glad you're here. Let's hear a little bit about your background. I mean, you're just up the road from me in the west of England. We could have almost done this in my office, but how did you? What's your journey, particularly journey in relation to the body?
Oh my God! Well, I started my apprenticeship was cooking. So 16. Thank you very much. School said please leave. And I've got very severe ADHD, and I didn't know that. Well, I didn't know the name of it at the time. It was just, me mucking about. So left school, kitchens, chef, Korea, London, all that kind of stuff, and did pretty well. It was, but I loved it. It was very classical cookery. I always tell the story about making hollandaise. 60 egg yolks and 40 pounds of clarified butter. So it's a sensory thing, when you're cooking, you're feeling things change as it's going. So I think that was that. Went to Australia, travelled in Australia, and again, and then sort of had this. I'd done up some martial arts, and I'd had this neck injury for years, and it was getting worse. And so loads of treatment, you name it. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry had poked me and prodded me. I'd been rolfed half a dozen times in 10 sessions rather. And so somebody gave me this thing called Bowen. Didn't know what it was, bit of a smoker, bit of a drinker. And she sort of came in and prodded me a bit. She didn't really know what she was doing. And the thing went away. It was kind of one of those weird, was it, maybe it would have gone away anyway. I'm very skeptical.
Right.
I'm a very cynical sort of person. So that changed that. I then went and learnt that, brought that back to the UK in 93, nobody was doing it here. Started teaching it, didn't know my ass from my elbow. And just sort of, that was my journey really. I'd done some reflexology, I'd done a bit of massage. And then as I was developing things, trying to teach other people to do it, set a college up, I realized that the anatomy books and what I was looking at didn't really tell me the story. So, but along the way, yeah, I've run everything from stand-up comedy to jelly wrestling in the outback, and deckhand on a trawler on the Great Barrier Reef. It's been a wild life.
Do you now? You're mostly sort of teaching anatomy or Bowen, or how are you kind of tell us about your sort of week generally?
Well, my hands-on stuff is Bowen. That's all I do, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I've just come back from Iceland. I've been in Iceland for doing three different workshops in Iceland. So, and then I'm going to be in Poland. I'm going to go and embalm. I've got some cadavers coming up for a class in June, so I embalm those in a specific way because we want mobility. I've got some really challenging clients next week to work with, pain, movement management, just increasing their range. I've got an online workshop for some Bowen people on Wednesday. So, it's lots of things. I could fill my day. And I'm also finishing off a health sciences, an honours degree in health sciences. So that's the end of the year coming up and a big exam. So it's a any day I could look at it and go, I'm not going to do that today.
And
my days are filled with potential failure.
I think we both like variety as well. And okay, you got asked this a lot, I'm sure, before, but what is Bowen Technique? Tell us about it. It's not really very well known, is it? Like, I have sort of like a vague image of it in my head, but tell us about it.
Yeah, I think it's sort of captured the imagination of the therapy and population. It's very light touch. We do a series of moves, little disturbance of the tissue, and then we leave it, let that settle in, and come back and do a little bit more. And basically the premise is that I think as manual therapists, we tend to do too much. We make it about us. We've got the certificate on the wall and we say, I'm a deep tissue therapist, and we rub, poke, prod for however long it takes for somebody to say, please stop, and then, give us 60 quid and then leave. So I think probably, as I've seen, whether we do it deeply or whether we don't do it deeply is probably doesn't make any difference. And we don't know a lot of stuff. We have all these stories in our industry that we tell, and we don't really know squat about what we're doing or why we're doing it or why anything works. But we know that touch is really important. Probably what Bowen's doing is letting those nervous systems work themselves out. So, we're just giving it some time and a little less pressure to do it.
Right. So I think most of us would agree touch is important. Lots of sort of studies on that, subjective experience on that. But then, as you say, there's a lot of stories that sort of sound good in the world. We'll have body workers of all kinds listening to this. Everyone from Thai massage to Rosen method people to, plenty of Rolfers, plenty of Alexander Technique people, massage therapists, listeners will be from all sorts of background. And all the yogis and martial artists listening have probably had some kind of treatment at some point. And you hear these stories and people tell you, well, I'm releasing the fascia, or now I'm doing this or that. And I've always sort of gone, are you sure? Do you know that?
No, and this is the thing, is that it's you use the word story, and that's what it is. It's a story. We tell a story, and we create a visual understanding and a way of explaining things to people and so on and so forth. And as long as we realize their stories, then everything's good. I think the trouble is that people have sort of used these terms and without really necessarily considering what they're talking about. And we've ended up with this thing of literally we are releasing the fascia, and we know that things change under our hands, but that's not fascia, and because it can't be. And so we end up doing the thing that we criticize of, medicine only treats the symptom of the disease, and we go, well, we're doing this thing called releasing fascia, which we're not, but then get upset when somebody challenges it. So as long as we think it's a story, as long as we understand that we don't really know what we're doing, and as long as all those theories that we have, we understand are sort of basically, bullshit, then we're all good. But this is the trouble that we have, and the reason we don't have touch in our health systems at a point of delivery is because, we, as Mark Hammond once said in Private Eye, we big up our therapies by talking unscientific bollocks, and it doesn't get taken very seriously. So Yeah. And fascia in particular is kind of fashionable, starting a few years back. I see what you did there.
Fashionable. I unfortunately, it wasn't a deliberate joke. Fashionable. I've heard fascist before. But it's certainly something people talk about a lot. You'll hear it in the trauma world now. People will talk about it a lot. In yoga, teachers have loved to talk about it. And, there are some genuine people in that field, obviously, but it's become a bit of a trend, hasn't it? And it seems like it's spoken about a bit too much. Like there's teachers who are, there's one teacher I had on who she was so obsessed with it, and she went on about it in this very poetic way. And it was convincing in the way poetry is convincing, but it was actually word salad. Yeah. It was one of the few podcasts I've done where I really got angry with the guest. So for fuck's sake, what are you actually saying? I think this is the trouble, is that you hear people. I sat at a conference a couple of years ago, and everybody was raving about this particular person who is very scientific, and this person used a lot of words, and they came out, wasn't that fantastic? I said, what did they actually say? What was the takeaway message? And it was the passion that they spoke with, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And so fascia gets this thing really where there isn't, the point is that there isn't really a thing that you can look at and go, that's fascia, and
over anything else. There's lots of different things that you can look at and say that's a type of fascia. So we think we have things like the linings, the wrappings around the thick wrappings. That's what people think of when they think about fascia. Well, that stuff's got the constituency, literally the constituency that is stronger than steel rope. You're not going to change that with your hands. And then we've got our other types of stuff, which is the stuff that holds the muscle fibers together, and the deeper fibers. So epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. These are all different words for types of collagen-based connective tissue. So it's all connective tissue, and all fascia is connective tissue, but not all connective tissue is fascia. And there, it doesn't have a job by itself. It has a job in connection and association with lots of other things. It's a scaffolding. So, if you don't want to sit on a chair, if fascia is that easy to fix, your partner would give you a hug or a cuddle and release your fascia, or you sit on a chair and your fascia would be released. We don't want it. It gives us our tension, it gives us our movement, and it allows muscle to be the weak thing that it is, because, muscle is inherently very, there's no strength to it. So, it needs a container, and that's what the fascia and the connective tissues are doing. So, are we changing it with our hands? No, I mean, we're moving fluids around, but there's nothing really that you're going to change with your hands as far as fascia is concerned.
So what are people doing with their hands then? Because it sounds, I like a good hard elbow in the back kind of massage, probably the opposite of kind of Bowen.
Yeah.
It feels good. I feel better afterwards. What's actually going on, whether it be a kind of hard massage or a more just gentle touch one? What do you think's happening?
You like what you're getting, it's context. You go to this person, they put their elbow in your back. You like that. I mean, you wouldn't like it if you were at a bar in a gig, so it's all context, isn't it? So it's somebody, you think I lie down, somebody goes hard on me. Is the outcome going to be any different in relation to whether I, went in and did it very lightly or whether I went in and did it hard? Probably not. Your receptors in your skin and your tissues, and they're very superficial for the most part, and your joints are picking up on pressure, and it so happens that feels good, and you move it around and what have you, and you go away and you feel good. So it doesn't really make any difference as long as you like it, as long as the therapist is happy to give it to you. The end result is everybody's happy. She gets paid, you get your, they get paid, you get your massage that you like, and I don't have a problem with that. But we don't really know. We know that not much is happening in terms of physiology. You don't change anything, but what you are changing is output. Tension comes into the body from a neural output. Your brain says send out those action potentials along afferent neurons to that area and create muscular contraction. So if you and I are sitting here talking, there is a huge amount of muscular contraction going on that's keeping us upright. If you were dead, you wouldn't be sitting on a chair, you'd fall over. So there's no inherent tension in that system. It's only there because the brain's sending that out via the spinal cord to your tissues. So if I interfere with that, and this is Melzack and Wall and pain gating theory in the 60s, if I interfere with that, either going in or going out, it potentially changes the output from the brain and the input. So
for you, it's neurological, not kind of just working on the tissues themselves. It's there's a signal going to my back, and that signal is creating kind of a chronic tension there. And then there's some kind of touch, whether it be soft or hard, and then that signal is interrupted, that signal stopped.
Yeah.
So that kind of unnecessary contraction.
Yeah. It could be touch. It could be touch. It could be hypnosis. It could be drugs. It could be it could be a beer and an hour with Netflix. It doesn't make any difference. Whatever it is that you do, it changes that. It changes the input. It changes the output. Now, there's lots of other things that we can talk about, like muscle knots and trigger points and all these things. But again, those are very superficial skin and fatty tissues. You don't find those things in the deep tissues. And so really the sense of touch that we have is a very, very profound and important element as far as our development is concerned, as far as growth is in children is concerned. We there's the repair, infection control, and how we get that touch is entirely down to the individual as to what they like. Unfortunately, we've become a bit suspicious of it. It's been sexualized, and there is that thing of touch being something that we have to avoid. And physiotherapy units now don't do any touch in some instances, and I think that's enormous. We do it in NICU units, and we do it sort of beginning of life and end of life, but in the middle, when people are frightened and scared, and I remember waking up from surgery. I had my collarbone, broke my collarbone, and woke up. They pinned it and they put the pin in. And I woke up and they kept me in because I'd had a bit of an infection and my temperature was high and I'd throw up violently after the anesthetic. And I woke up at sort of 3 o'clock in the morning and there was this nurse assistant or person who was just there and they put this cool flannel on my head and stroked my hair, put this cool flannel, and it was just the most wonderful thing you can imagine.
Yeah.
And all the medicine in the world doesn't replace the power of that thing. And I will never forget that. It was just a phenomenal thing.
And there does seem to be something that, for example, I've got one of these massage guns, right? Theragun or something. And it's great. It's fun. I bring it to retreats. Everybody loves it. It's good also for getting a friend to give you a massage without much effort. You know what I mean? Because they can just do that. They don't have to, the wife's much more likely to move the gun up and down than she is to give me a full massage. But it lacks something. There's a lack in that the human touch isn't there.
Yeah.
Because it's not just pressure, the manual therapy, whether it's light or heavy, there's something much more going on.
Yeah, and it's somebody connecting with you. It's somebody feeling like where there's something happening in your body and noticing that and changing their touch and their stroke. It's no different than making love to a beautiful woman in the words of Swiss Tony. It's the same sort of thing. We react to individuals, and most of our communication as humans is nonverbal. 94% of it is nonverbal. So it's all behavioural. And touch is massively important to us as apes. And we don't really do it. We don't really do it very well. Our brains are so big now as humans. I don't want anybody to touch me. That we sort of shy away from it, except in intimate settings. And I think that culturally, we create problems in societies where we fear touch and we don't. Look at what's happening in America at the moment. That's a society that doesn't touch each other. And
what would you say happens? Is it just kind of like increased stress? Is it, increased conflict as a result of that? People aren't very well regulated, the health issues, because there are, quite a bit of, tell me if I'm wrong, studies saying that there's quite a lot of health implications, immune system functioning and things. Like, what are you pointing to there?
Well, I think you just encapsulated it for me. It's all of those things. We're facing a problem at the moment in terms of our healthcare, and the biggest threat to human life on this planet at the moment is antibiotic resistance. And we've seen this increase. We haven't had a new antibiotic since 1970. And back in the 60s, it was, we're going to get rid of all bacterial infection. Well, we haven't, and it's getting worse and worse. So very soon, we're going to be in a situation where we can't do routine surgeries. This is World Health Organization stuff. It's not my opinion. It's just, we know it, and it's a huge problem. So we're going to have to find something that fills that gap. And manual therapy, touch, people that are trained to understand body-wide mechanisms and how things fit together are the obvious go-to that we have. We've seen this massive crisis in the States as far as painkillers are concerned with fentanyl and illegal stuff, but also in this country, we now know that our painkillers don't work. They don't have good long-term outcomes. They muck up other systems. So touch is one of those things. It's cheap. It's non-addictive. We know it works. But at the same time, we've got this sort of polarized view of conventional medicine, and then at the far end of it, the bonkers people who are sort of very anti-medicine, and somewhere in the middle is some wisdom. And I think if we can,
there's a bit of a conflict going on.
Yeah, I think that's where I walk. I walk between the field of science because I get that, and my whole adult life being in touch, and the two of them need the bloody heads knocking together. So that's really what I think my job is.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Well, what is muscle knot? You had a Japanese student who asked you that 10 years ago, and I remembered. What's a knot? Like right now, I've had kind of a long, stressful week. It's a Friday afternoon. I can feel some sort of lumpy bits a little bit in my back, and I might roll around on the floor and work them out myself. I might ask my wife to sort of give me a quick rub down kind of thing. But I can feel something there that's not very pleasant. That feels like it might. One thing that I found really works actually is going to the gym and lifting really heavy weights, which I think recruits all the fibers, and they have to let go again afterwards. I'm not sure. But
that would work if the knot was in the muscle, but you can't really get a muscle knot. You're feeling
muscle.
No, you're feeling you're probably holding something. There's lack of fluid, but most of the knotty stuff that we feel is in the more superficial tissues. So when you touch your skin, if you pick your skin up, if people listen to this, you can sort of pick your skin up and you move your skin around, and underneath that, attached to that, is a fatty layer. Now that covers the whole of the body. Now sometimes around our bellies it's thicker, and around our butts and so on. Around the front of the shin, for example, it's really, really thin. Back of the hand. But the layer that is between our skin and the next layer down, which is our deeper fascia, is full of fat, these adipocytes. And these are held in place with the same connective tissue fibers, the collagen fibers that are fascia. There's a lot of discussion about what the name of this is. There's no consensus, but it's superficial fascia, the panicular layer, the hypodermis. But essentially, these are fibrous. So once you pick those up and you move those around, you'll feel them as being knotty in those tissues. Once you take that away, the muscle itself doesn't have the capacity to get knotty. You know, muscle does one job, and it pulls in one direction. That's all muscle does. It can't push. It can't do anything else. And the moment you touch it with a scalpel, it falls apart. You know, you've seen it yourself. So the connective tissues may cross over in lots of different directions, but muscle itself cannot knot. There is no potential for it to do that.
Right.
So most of that feeling that we have
down as well, isn't it? I remember when we did this section a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's very deep. So most of the stuff that you're feeling underneath your hands or in a massage is very superficial. And it's in the fatty fibers, it's in those superficial layers that are still connected down to the deeper layers. And so otherwise you wouldn't be able to, release them and break them up. So, and which you can do in a massage situation, but they are.
Are they physical or are they neurological kind of holding patterns?
They I think a bit of both, probably. I mean, they still massive amounts of sensory information in there. They possibly serve as signalers. They probably serve as hormonal cell signalers in there as well. They get stuck in there. But once we take the skin away, if we take that skin and superficial fascia off a dead body and we lay that to one side, you still feel those sort of lumpy bits in there. But, put that on the tables, completely separate. But the underlying tissue that's left is just not really something that people recognize. You rub that and you go, well, I don't recognize that as a therapist. Everything that we touch is on our skin and superficial fascia because we don't go around touching muscle and deep fascia.
Yeah,
we just see the pictures in the book and we think, oh, that's what we're touching, because nobody's actually stopped and said, hang on a minute, guys, what is this thing, this skin and this fatty stuff you're touching? Oh, it's just fat. It's dismissed and cut away and thrown in the bin. So we don't really have the conversation about it.
Yeah, we've had various anatomists on, and one of the questions you sent me to ask you was, why do you like dead bodies so much, Julian? That was a great question. And various anatomists have come in and they've sort of said, look, what's in the textbooks is actually it's made by cutting, it's made in someone's mind. There are things like the fascia and some of the fatty layers that are just discarded as not really interesting somehow. It's kind of as much how you cut it up as anything. In reality, it looks kind of different. You can, cut up the heart one way or another. Yeah. It's sort of massively out of date is often the story I hear as well. It hasn't really been updated in 100 years. Yeah. I mean, is that your sort of basic take on?
I mean, to take it, they've probably said, and it's all true. You carve, you create a sculpture in terms of making something look like it does in the book. But also, there's a political and a religious element to it that we don't really want our anatomy to look like humans. Our skin and our fatty layer is the layer that we connect with the world with. When we hug somebody, we're not hugging with our deltoids or our triceps. We are hugging that skin and superficial layer. And so it's very important that we don't look like humans in an anatomy book. And there's been this whole standoff between the church and the anatomists, because, don't forget, only last year, the Pope said that you could be cremated as a Catholic. Before that, you couldn't be cremated, but as long as your pieces are kept together. So even going back to the time of Henry Gray in the 1830s, he was still a very religious man, and that space between
Gray's Anatomy, one of the classic textbooks.
Yeah, the church and Henry Gray, and obviously, can we just shout out for Henry Van Dyke, who did all the pictures? You don't hear about Henry Van Dyke. He was the man that all the pictures we use are all Henry Van Dyke's pictures. Henry Van Dyke Carter. And so, Henry Gray was a religious man. And so there was this idea about learning the systems of the body and then, keeping that separate, because the biblical teaching says that you go to bed, you go to heaven to be recreated with all your family and friends and your maker. And so the poorly educated, as an extension of their punishments if they were hanged, would be to be handed to the anatomist, because then they wouldn't go back in one piece. And this is still relatively recent when you look at the things of anatomy. And so we've got these bits that we can say, well, they're anatomical, and we put them to one side, and they're not human. So, but at the same time, you've got to look at the systems. You've got to learn those bits inside, and you can't do that when you've got skin and fat in the way. But the idea of what there is just, well, we just get it out of the way. But yeah, anatomy is not what you see in the books. It's a very poor representation of the human body, and harmful as well.
And harmful. Okay, so why harmful, and what might surprise people?
It's harmful because essentially, you say, why do I like dead bodies so much? Because they can't lie to you. What you're seeing in the dead body is what there is. There's a reality to it. So if it's not in that body what it looks like in the book, then who's right? They haven't gotten control over what their body looks like. Anatomy is harmful because it creates this idea. We teach our undergraduate medical students sections of the body. If you go into a dissection lab during a test, medical students, they have pins in their, upper body, pins in the arms. They identify those bits, and they're either right or wrong, and they pass that bit of their anatomical study. But nobody teaches them what happens if you tilt your head to one side, lift your shoulder up, and then present with carpal tunnel. So it becomes a separation. You know the names of the bits, but you don't know how things work. You know that if you're moving around on a bike or a horse and you move your head, then you load your knees and feet and ankles differently. And the bike or the horse or the skis or whatever, you move accordingly. Well, that's the laws of physics. So, if I move my shoulder, anybody's listening, you move your shoulder up and down, your arm up and down, and then put your hand on your opposite hip, and you'll feel movement in your hand on your hip, around your abdomen. And so what's that? Well, that's not an anatomy book. So we have to stabilize in terms of movement, and our head position will make a difference. But we don't teach our undergraduate medical students, and therefore our surgeons, the fact that if your head is pushed to one side, it's going to load your knees differently, and you move your feet out differently. And so therefore you've got to consider that when you start to think about, why somebody's knees need operating. I don't have a problem with surgery. I think, if you need your knees done, get them done quick before the antibiotics run out. But understand that they're designed for 120 years. And if they've worn unevenly, it's because you've done something to them to make them wear unevenly.
So it's the function, the usage, rather than the anatomy.
Yeah. Well, we ignore, anatomy ignores the laws of physics, and conveniently. And so things like the big yoga one was you shouldn't do any forward bends because of shear loading, right? I don't know if you've heard that idea.
What's shear loading?
So shear loading, if you imagine my hand going in front of underneath your nose, right? So that's a shear force. So the idea is at the base of the spine, where your sort of the lower sacrum curve around your butt is that if you bend forwards in your lumbar spine around the area, you put too much forward force on the lumbar spine. So I got asked this question, and I thought, well, let's go have a little look at the studies involved to see how much load one can take. Now, the good news is you can take a lot of load, and you haven't got to worry about forward bends. But the studies that have been done, there was a meta-analysis that looked at all the different papers. And all the different papers that you could use were all looking at how much load you can put on bits of lumbar spine by taking those bits out and loading them with, pressurometers and what have you. And some of them were done on pigs, and some of them done on humans. But they took bits of cadaveric spine out and saw how much you load them, and then before they break. Well, that's not how the body works. And that's how we do a lot of our study. We go, well, we studied this, but what we did, we study a bit of that
like
body.
A spine bit of, them out.
Yeah.
And, I know you're a huge yoga fan, Julian.
Yeah.
So any other yoga myths we should bust? I mean, there's a couple, my friend, I have a friend in New York who wrote a book called Yoga Myths a few years back, and people were shocked when they found out that twists didn't detoxify the spine and a few other things. Any yoga myths you want to bust?
Well, I did yoga pretty competitively, stretching my body in tight clothes as a young man doing Iyengar stuff, and let's say buttocks in a certain way. So I loved it. It was great. It did me well. But it's a form of movement. It's a form of movement, and it's a way of the yogis of old would get themselves back into their body in order to then be able to sit still for 8 hours and, go astral flying, whatever they were doing. So that there's a mystification of yoga that kind of interests me. I think that's quite, we wandering around going namaste. So that's cool. And also this idea that somehow being bendy is better for you than not being bendy. And, oh, look at me, I can, bend down and tie my shoelaces with my teeth. Well, whoop-de-doo. So
how does that help your life?
Yeah, it's functional. That, if I go into warrior pose and I put my arms up above my head, if I do that a lot, it will make me better at doing that. It doesn't make me better at playing the trombone or, Monopoly or what have you. It's function specific. So yoga's great, moving is great, but being bendy is no healthier than not being bendy. And sometimes if you've got back pain, it's because you're too bendy, because you're not stable. So, and I've seen that quite a lot. So this idea that stretching is good for you, or somehow better for you, or you should do it, is one of the biggest myths that there is. That stretching is not a bad thing. If you like it, do it, but it's not.
What does it do? Does it? Because I find I don't get particular big flexibility gains with it compared to
That's a really interesting question.
Neurologically,
yeah,
I sort of might feel kind of more in my body a bit because the sensation kind of anchors me there a bit, like because it's intense.
Yeah,
I might get a little endorphin high or something from it.
Well, you will. I mean, that's what we're feeling, that stretch in the joints mainly, at the end of the joints, and that's the Golgi tendon receptor. So they're different types of receptors, and you feel different things. So that's a warning to say stop. Now we know that we can down-regulate. We can sort of switch those warning signs off. It's a little bit like a Chinese buffet, all you can eat. If you push through it, you can eat more than you.
I've never tried that, Julian. It sounds like we're doing tomorrow night. It sounds fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can push through it, and what that is that's a hormone called leptin that's saying stop eating, you're full, and screw it, I'm going to keep going. And so the same thing, we know that we don't really understand why people will continue to get flexibility with muscle. We know you don't lengthen the muscle, because otherwise you'd have to lengthen the bone. Everybody that was bendy would be 8 feet tall. So we know that. We don't need to do it. Cats pandiculate, they don't stretch, and so they go through this non-stop range of movement. So we don't really know why that increase of flexibility, but probably because of the sensation of down-regulating the sensation, the stretch. We see this with people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. They keep looking for that stretch and they can't find it. So it's a very primal thing that we want to feel the end of the range of a movement, but staying in that end of the range will generally increase our capacity to stay in the edge of the range, because the brain of the body says, all right, well, functionally, you need to do this. We are hugely adaptable as humans. So, you want to get fat, get fat. You want to get bendy, we'll let you do that. But as to why that happens and how that happens, we don't really know.
It does seem that yogis will stretch and get more and more numb to the common sense signal saying, don't do that. And they'll get more and more unused to it, more and more tolerant of it, which actually might have a benefit in terms of sort of psychologically dealing with difficulty, learning to relax under pressure. That's potentially beneficial as a skill. But then normally I've seen many yogis, it would just, whatever the muscle would just snap. 20 years of doing that and desensitizing, and all the serious injuries I've heard of in yoga, they weren't doing something crazy. They were just doing what they've normally done for 20 years. They're doing whatever the stretch was, and then one day, ping.
Yeah. If you think that the end of that, it's the end of those, it's the joints that you're feeling it, where those muscles are. It's not so much the muscle, it's where the muscles are coming to attach the bone. And so you're feeling that at that point. It's a warning signal to say, don't keep going. So the potential is there to weaken that attachment. This is what I was saying about some people you see from the ballet dancers, and they retire and they're lacking stability in those joints. So that's the potential. If the joints aren't stable, they're wrapped around with a labral covering, and that can go as well. As we get older, muscle tone decreases, and so the potential there is to have that injury. So mobility is great, but stretching doesn't prevent injuries. It doesn't repair injuries. In fact, the studies have shown us that stretching before sports performance generally has the chance of increasing the risk of injury when you get the injury.
I saw one study from Australia saying that, the Aussies take the sports science pretty seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
The conclusion I saw there was probably shouldn't be stretching, maybe just moving a bit lightly.
Do some flexibility training at another time, but, actually stretching before you play. And I think, most professional sports have got that now. But 15, 20 years down the track. It's sort of the rest of the populace is yet to catch up. But look, the thing is it's a social thing. If you like it and you go somewhere and you socialize, that's really important.
It's co-regulatory, right? Doing everything together as a group.
Absolutely.
The Nazis did it. It's really good for you as a group. It's it's like everyone together.
Hang on, what you're saying? Hang on, wait. Are you saying that being a Nazi is good for you?
I'm saying co-regulatory practices involving groups of people doing things in unison, whatever the political alignment, has a co-regulatory function.
Yeah, so look out for Mark's next retreat on goose stepping.
Someone's going to take this extract out and said, Mark said it could be line dancing, it could be football
goose stepping,
it could be all sorts, Julian. I just
alternate the height of your arm and the arms that you're using when using Kyle.
You should have seen my last workshop in Germany. I had them done. Anyway, so they freak out. So more myths. So let's see what we've done. Core stability. That's a thing. We've upset the yogis. Let's upset the Pilates people next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is one of those things that I don't know if you've heard of Clubhouse. I used to go on that a fair bit, and it's an app where people. Yeah, it's sort of people talk to each other and have debates on this thing. And it's kind of cool. You connect with lots of people around the world. But people would sort of say to me, it's a little bit my hand grenade in a chicken coop thing. A little bit like, so I'd say, I don't think there's any such thing as core stability. And people go mad about this. Yeah, and so then the various groups then, have people saying, well, I say that core stability is this, and I say that core stability is that. And really, and they've all got different versions of it. So that kind of proves my point that if you can't come up with a specific concept of it, then it's a vague idea. It's like my idea of God or religion or what have you. So the idea of the core being these series of abdominal structures seems to be a bit stupid. I mean, if you want to find a core muscle that is poorly looked at and considered, then go to gluteus maximus, because most people don't have any range on it. So I think that core can be one of those things that's just mythical and a bit silly and a bit poorly thought out. But again, it goes back to that thing of, I know what you mean when you say consider your core and your position and be aware of your body. A little bit like fascia release. It's kind of, we know what we mean, but language can be very powerful. And I think we have to look at the language we use sometimes. Our pelvic floor. Well, it's not a floor, is it? Which floor have you ever seen that's like a bowl that's got 3 holes in it or 2 holes in it? So once we use that term floor, we treat it like a floor and we think of it like a floor. So language and words have the ability to be very powerful, and then repeated often enough, they have meaning even without the original thing having any meaning. Like the word woke, it doesn't mean anything, but it gets weaponized. So
it means stupid cunt. That's what it means. So what would you call a pelvic floor then? Would you call it a sort of genital harp? I quite like the idea of it as a sort of stringed
genital harp. Yeah, I quite like that. I think more of if we think of a bowl, if we think of a bowl, then you think rotation, you think round, you think all the things that are around it. You think floor, it's got 4 sides or what have you. And you can contract it and pull it through and all these kinds of things. So, a pelvic bowl, pelvic diaphragm is another one. These are different ways of thinking about it, but we just have to think. I think sometimes in this industry, in this business, we use these words and we don't really. What do you mean? That's what I find myself saying. Yeah, foam rollers. Like you said, foam rollers. What if I lie on this foam roller every day for 3 weeks? Absolutely fuck all. So, but the action of getting down on the floor and then getting up off the floor.
But it hurts, Julian. So it must be good for me.
I just come around and hit you with a brick if you want that.
Calvinistic work ethic in my implicit model of healing. Yeah. It really hurts, so it must be good.
Yeah, I had that. I started out with that. I did reflexology, and there was a Korean course I did where they give you a little wooden stick to work on people's feet. And I'm thinking, if it doesn't hurt, it's not working. And I've kind of abandoned that idea now because it's if people like to get hurt, then that's fine. There's lots of
a Saturday evening, isn't it, Julian?
Absolutely. I have no problem with anybody liking the sensation that they have. I'm just saying it's not really something that you need if you want to change it. No.
So foam rolling doesn't work. Yoga doesn't work. Pilates doesn't work.
No, hang on. Don't you start putting words in my mouth, young man. Pilates, yoga, these are great forms of exercise. They're absolutely wonderful things with wonderful people teaching it. And I've done them, I was doing Pilates back in the 90s with Alan Herdman at Pineapple in London before it was a thing. So I think it's a brilliant form of exercise.
Hipster.
Yeah, so I think they're great. And massage and deep tissue and rolfing, you name it, they're all brilliant. No problem at all. It's just a case of the language that we use and the stories that we tell. Hold on to your practice dearly, but hold on to your theory lightly. And if you're going to get offended by somebody saying, core stability is now, or fascia release is bollocks, then, you might want to have a little look at yourself. So, that's why the dissections are so interesting, because you come in there, it's like, well, don't shout at me. There's the donor. You tell me, you bring your sacred cows in and be prepared to dissect those as well. And then we're going to have a good conversation. But
yeah.
The SI joint doesn't move, so you can give me all you like chapter and verse about the SI joint going out, but it ain't gone anywhere because it doesn't move to go out. So, One
more then. What about release? Because you hear like fascia release, fascia, we'll talk about emotional relief, trauma relief, and the embodiment world. This is big. Are these things related? What's your take on it?
I think what I do in a session is between that person's central nervous system and that person's other part of the central nervous system, and we have no idea 99.9% of the time what our body's doing. You don't know where in your bowels today that right now that sausage is you had for breakfast. So there's a whole bunch of cascades that are happening in terms of hormones to change your temperature, and so the idea of having something release consciously isn't something that I'm attached to, and I don't like that idea. I think what we want is, because otherwise we end up like, well, I'm going to push you until you cry, or I'm going to push you until you stop hurting. Well, that's just my agenda, not necessarily that body's agenda. People 4 weeks later come back, the pain just went away by itself. Fine, that's a natural process.
And release is a particular model, isn't it? Like, people think about emotions this way. They go, there's something in me that needs to come out. And it's a way of looking at things. It may be useful, but I sometimes wonder how accurate that is. Like, I've never seen an emotion come out. What I've seen is crying. I've seen shaking. I've seen, you know what I mean? So it's like, is really what this model of, I want to dig into this model of release. What does it imply? Where might it misdirect us?
I think it implies that something significant has changed that will not then go back. And I don't think that's necessarily helpful or correct. And I think some therapists see it as a sign of their validation that they've done something to make something happen, and pushed it to that point, and they go, yes, it's wonderful. You've had this emotional change, and now you realize what was happening in life. I think the penny drops with people. I think we all know that that drinking 6 pints a night and having 4 burgers isn't good for us, or smoking or what have you. On a level, we understand what we have to do, the relationships and the work and the things that we do. But most of that is happening subconsciously, and we're not in control of our emotional state. We wake up in the morning, we're happy. 5 minutes late, we're angry. Next minute, we're skipping down the road. And so, the Buddhist teacher Shanti Davis says, our emotions are like an untamed elephant, that we have very little control of what's happening to us emotionally, and we also have very little control of what's happening to us hormonally and physically. We think we do. We have that appearance. It's a mirage. But so once we go into a session room, I think there's certain things that people might go, okay, well, yeah, that's I didn't realize that. That's a realization. So I think if we can take release to realization, conscious thought, all those things. But the idea of releasing something like fascia, you can't release fascia. It's not a box of bloody doves. Where's it going to go? It's like, what are you doing with it?
Can you see the lovely rainbow out the window from where you are?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I saw it. I've just come back from a climb and saw this beautiful rainbow as we were coming back from the climbing.
Yeah,
center.
It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Just out the window. You're talking about illusions and appearances and things as a Buddhist teachers. There's a rainbow out the window. So,
and that's the other thing. It's like we need 3 things to have a rainbow. We need the water, we need the sun, but we also need somebody to see it. Because without the person to see it, there's no rainbow.
Here we go. Quantum rainbow physics. Loving it. Sounds deep, that. Sounds spiritual.
Oh, yeah. Right. It's getting very fucking deep, that is.
All right. There's one more here you sent me. You don't believe in exercise. What do you mean you don't believe in exercise?
I think that we tend to have this idea that, you know, you've got to put your trainers on and go to the gym, or you've got to somehow formalize it. And what we think of in terms of movement. I'm just starting a little plug for my, well, it's not my session, I'm not really doing anything, but Monday I'm starting this session for what we're calling older boulders, this older people over the age of 50 to come and have a climb on a Monday lunchtime. And you know why? You might think, oh, it's a dangerous sport. Well, bouldering is a great sport. It's a great way of moving. It's non-competitive. It doesn't force anything. So the idea of exercise and formalizing it is one of those things I think it puts people off. And it's why so many men particularly of my age and younger, you know, sort of the plus 48 group, don't do anything because they're
interesting. The bouldering gym, my wife and I went there a few times in Frome.
Yeah,
and it was a great vibe.
Yeah,
just
it's lovely.
Nice people, all ages, kids to, you know, older people, just people being helpful, just a cool vibe. And I wish yoga goes with a spiritual, you know, and apparently that's quite common amongst bouldering. It's the first time I'd ever been. It's just there happens to be a good one in this little town. I decided to pop along. And a few people told me, they said, oh yeah, it's really normal. You get this sort of nice vibe in bouldering places. And it's very natural exercise somehow. You're stretching, you're moving, you're doing this, you're doing that, but you're not going, okay, how many reps can I get out here? Or,
no. And I mean, you know, you see a circuit board on that, and you know, now I'm a 60-year-old man. It sort of leans backwards, and I can go 2 rounds around that circuit board, and you can get somebody that's very fit and very lean, and you know, he's not going to get 10 moves, you know, not even halfway around it. So it's very functional. It's loading. It's sociable. You know, it's the only person you're working with is yourself. So I think exercise needs to be reframed, particularly, as I said, for the older guy that's, you know, his kids have got to teenage years and he's like, oh, I want to do something. Going out and playing football is going to kill you. We've got an over 50s football group that we play on a Wednesday night, and you know,
keeps you in business for the bodywork.
We've got to have about 40 people there to get 16 guys out, because they're all like, oh, you know. I think movement is the key, and I think exercise is a word that puts a lot of people off. And if you can say, let's get you moving, and how are you going to move? You know, what does that mean? Yeah. So I don't like the form of exercise, and I don't like how it's been put out for people in particularly of a certain age, that you got to go to the gym, and of course people don't. So how do we get our society moving better? Because it's a problem.
I thought the other day, there's far more dog walkers than there are people going to the gym.
Yeah.
You know, and I was thinking, because there's this thing saying, hey, come on, let's move, take me out, nudging you, it's pleasant, you know, dog walking. I was in the gym and I was thinking, God, I'm the only one here.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty rare. Not many people go to the gym. Like, what do you reckon, 1% of people?
I think very few people over a certain age take any kind of regular exercise. You know, we've got now 35% of our adult population that is obese. I mean, you know, that's not just overweight. You're going higher for overweight. Now, I don't buy into the whole concept of weight and health necessarily, but certainly we can see that there are comorbidities associated with that, and diet and what have you. So, you know, how do we have that conversation with, say, what can you do? Let's get you gently moving in a way that you like and is relaxing. It's not competitive. You're not going to be made to feel stupid. I think that's the trouble with some of the yoga and Pilates. It's like, well, I'm not going to go there as a slightly overweight 55-year-old man and make myself look daft in front of these beautiful, skinny 28-year-old women. It's going to, you know, that's the perception that some people have. Now, I know that is cut through with a whole bunch of the most amazing Pilates people that I know who cut through that, but it's a communication issue. It's an image issue. Yeah.
I mean, if you think of something from Brighton, Pete Blackaby's yoga class is mostly attended by 60-somethings, and it's functional, gentle movement, very few barriers to entry, very gentle, nice vibe. But you'd still see yoga on the door, and if you didn't know what was going on in that class, you'd be like, no, I don't think so. You know, yoga. And I find increasingly yoga teachers don't like to be called yoga teachers because it's got such a bad rap. And you are seeing this positive growth in movement culture now. Like, a lot of young people are into sort of like Ido Patel, kind of following on from that, Fighting Monkey. So I do see a sort of positive movement movement.
I think there's a class issue as well. You know, you're not going to tend to see the bloke that is the working class man in his late 40s, who's doing a manual job, going to go to a Pilates studio. Again, you know, obviously I'm being general, but Pilates and yoga and things like this are going to be, you know, white middle class sort of pastimes for people. So I think that you know, that's some of that issue as well. So I don't know what the answer to any of that is, but you know, maybe bouldering is sort of cuts through that a little bit. I don't really know, but certainly we need to get
popular, I think, for good reason. Yeah.
We certainly need to cut through that and get our society moving in a way that is, you know, cheap and accessible. And there we go.
Boom. All right. Any final things you want to say that you haven't said? Subjects you want to touch on that you haven't touched on before we wrap this up?
I make sourdough. That's the thing that teaches me the touch. I just love making a sourdough loaf. Not hipster, I mean,
sourdough, fluffy white Hovis sourdough. You're as bad as my German friends and their bread. Sourdough, unbelievable.
Fluffy white hour too. If I showed you how they make what the Chorley wood bread process is, you'd never touch a bloody loaf of that stuff again, mate.
I find myself sleepy if I have it, actually, so I don't eat it unless I'm going to sleep afterwards because it's a bit of sleep.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, I just, you know, what's the key? Move more. You know, make your plate size smaller and enjoy what you do. You know, find something that excites you and that you like and that, you know, doesn't make you feel guilty, and do that.
Great, Julian. Nice to have you on. Where do people find you if they want to find out about your work, workshops, cut up a dead body with you like I did? What do people do?
I've got a free paying webinar on my website, so you can go to functionalanatomy.com. I've got my one dissection workshop coming up this year in Poland. I've got a few places left on that. So if you want to come up and dissect with me in Poland, that's at the end of June, 26th to 30th of June. That's a life changer. You know, it's interesting how many times you've referenced that, you know, since we spoke. So you keep going back to that, and it's interesting. So and people do, you know, it changes the way that we see
it sticks in the mind as a movement person, body person. I'd say it's an experience. So you don't have to be super into anatomy, but you know, for me it was an interesting experience, both in terms of the body, but also an existential meditation. You know, definitely a couple of days. It's about 10 years ago we did it, but
it changes you. It really changes you. There was a yogi that came, Prem Fox came, osteopath yogi, lives in France, and he was really resistant to the, you know, his ideas were, and fair play to him. He did an interview with him, and he just on Wednesday he kind of let go, and he realized, shit, all the stuff I've been thinking about for the last 30 years is just wrong. And, you know, he just embraced that and went, right, okay, I just need to rethink some of the things I've been talking about. And I thought that was a really lovely step. So it's a real way of just looking at yourself and what your beliefs are and how you think the body is and all the anatomy that you've learned, and, you know, understanding movement. It gives you X-ray vision. So, you know, you can, next time somebody comes in, you go, I put my hands on a liver or a intestine. I know what that's like.
And it made you a renowned anti-vaxxer that you are today. Let's not have that conversation.
I'm not. I was a renowned anti-vaxxer. I was a very strong anti-vaxxer. When my kids were little, I didn't have them vaccinated. I studied immunology and cell biology, and I was wrong. And it's a very, very hard subject. It's bastard hard. I mean,
you know what? Let's not go there.
So, you know, I was wrong. I can understand it, but there we go. And that's why I put that question in, because it was trolling you as well, mate. But
nice to see you again.
Right, thank you. Let's catch up.
Pleasure.
Let's catch up. Now you're in Frome. Let's not be strangers.
I like that. I like that. I'm going to message you privately about something as well in a minute. Right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers, buddy. Take care. Bye now. Bye.
Right, well, Shea, if you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems to people like. Sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free.
and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check those out.